Every head in the courtroom turned sharply at once. The voice was calm, deep, and unmistakably familiar. A ripple of disbelief passed through the room. Standing at the back of the courtroom was Michael Jordan. Yes, that Michael Jordan, dressed not in a suit, but in a plain black t-shirt and track pants. No entourage, no cameras. Just a determined man holding a slim binder of documents. Some laughed. Some whispered, "Is this a publicity stunt?" Others pulled out their phones. "Wait, is that Michael Jordan?" a woman asked. "Probably filming something," someone else scoffed. "This isn't a sneaker drop, it's federal court." But Michael didn't flinch. His eyes were focused on the boy at the defendant's table, barely 18, in a borrowed jacket 2 sizes too large, his shoelaces untied, his face pale with fear. His name, Elijah Banks, a poor teen from Harlem who had once sent MJ a letter asking for help, and now, somehow, Jordan was here. The judge blinked, visibly caught off guard. "Mr. Jordan, is it?" "Yes, Your Honor," Michael said evenly. "I'm here to speak on behalf of Elijah Banks, if he'll allow it." The courtroom buzzed again. Elijah turned, stunned. You're serious?" he muttered under his breath. "You're Michael freaking Jordan." Michael leaned closer. "I read your case. I know they're railroading you. And I know you don't have a voice in this room, but I do. So if you want someone in your corner who's not trying to throw you away, let me talk." The judge tried to regain order. "Mr. Jordan, are you a licensed attorney?" "No, sir," Michael said. "But I've worked with legal teams for over 30 years. I've read contracts most lawyers wouldn't touch. And I've spent the last 2 weeks digging into this case because I saw a kid getting crushed by a machine designed to silence him." The prosecution objected. "This is unorthodox and frankly outrageous. This man is a basketball legend, not legal counsel." The judge held up a hand. "It's irregular, but Mr. Banks's court-appointed lawyer failed to appear. If Mr. Banks consents and Mr. Jordan understands the legal limitations, I will permit a preliminary hearing under court supervision." Elijah looked up at the man beside him. This wasn't just a basketball hero. This was a lifeline. He nodded. Michael stepped forward slowly, placed his binder on the desk, and opened it. Inside were notes, printed spreadsheets, color-coded legal references, and a cover sheet titled, "The Case Against the System." The room was silent. The prosecution smirked. Michael glanced at the prosecutor. "You brought legalese and bluster. I brought facts and truth." Gasps. The judge straightened. "Proceed." Michael held up a page. On March 12th, the city's redevelopment contract was digitally altered. But the signature trail leads to an IP address in Zurich, not from Elijah's laptop, but from a secure server tied to the developer's law firm. The courtroom leaned in. No laughter now, no smirks. This wasn't a press stunt. This was a fight. And Michael Jordan had just stepped into the ring. The courtroom was hushed, every eye fixed on the man who once redefined greatness on a basketball court, now redefining what it meant to show up for someone who had nothing. Michael Jordan's voice was even steady. "This isn't about basketball," he said as he turned another page. "It's about a 17-year-old kid who was handed a stack of forged documents and told to sign them or lose the only apartment his family had left. He signed, and then they set him up." Elijah's eyes widened. He hadn't told Michael that part. How did he know? The prosecutor, a clean-cut young man named Weston Clay, stepped forward. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mr. Jordan is not licensed. And these so-called facts—" Michael didn't let him finish. "Objection," he said dryly, turning toward the bench. "This man has had 6 months to prove his case, and all he's got is slander and assumptions. I'm asking for the chance to show the court the actual documents." The judge tapped his pen, intrigued. "Proceed." Michael laid out 3 pages on the desk, then clicked a remote. A grainy photo appeared on the court's projection screen, a document with the city's letterhead, time-stamped March 12th, and a metadata trail showing a Zurich IP address. Below it, a second file, the version Elijah was given to sign, dated March 14th, scrubbed clean of foreign traces. "This document was planted," Michael said, And the original? It never implicated Elijah. The updated version does, because someone changed the terms after the fact and pinned it on a kid with no lawyer. Weston Clay objected again. This is wild speculation. Michael looked him in the eye. It's called a pattern. Your law firm represents the same redevelopment group that stood to gain from this forced eviction. You know it, I know it. And the kid beside me is the only one who was never supposed to figure it out. The judge scribbled something. We will recess until tomorrow to verify this metadata and review the evidence. Mr. Jordan, you may return for the next session. As the gavel struck, the courtroom erupted with murmurs. Michael leaned over to Elijah. We cracked the door. Now we blow it off the hinges. Elijah could only whisper, Why are you helping me? Michael looked at him. Because I know what it's like to be poor, underestimated, and told to shut up, and I know what it's like to fight back. That night, Elijah sat on the steps of his grandmother's building in the Bronx. His world had flipped upside down. A week ago, he was waiting for a court date that felt like an execution. Now, Michael Jordan was defending him like he was worth the world. Inside his backpack was a folder full of papers he didn't understand. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to fight alone anymore. 3 blocks away, Michael sat in a borrowed SUV, laptop open on his knees, scanning line after line of contract law. No cameras, no trophies, just the greatest basketball player of all time doing his homework. The fight had just begun. It was just past 2 a.m. in a dusty corner of Michael Jordan's private gym, transformed temporarily into a war room. No assistants, no trainers. Just a table, a laptop, legal pads, and 1 black coffee gone cold. Michael sat hunched over highlighted documents, earbuds in, listening to a recording of a zoning board hearing from 6 months ago. He rewound the audio. And once we secure the juvenile signature, the title reverts automatically. A voice said, muffled but clear. Michael pressed pause. Juvenile signature. That phrase struck like a fast-break dunk. Whoever had spoken those words hadn't just planned to pressure Elijah, they had counted on his ignorance of the law. Michael scribbled it down. Intentional exploitation of minor? Contractual coercion? He wasn't a lawyer, but he knew predatory behavior when he saw it. He'd grown up watching people get eaten alive by systems they never understood. Suddenly, his phone buzzed. Unknown caller. He let it ring twice, then answered. Jordan, he said curtly. A voice crackled on the other end. Low. Male. You should sit this one out. Nobody asked for your jump shot in court. Michael's voice stayed even. Then why are you calling me in the middle of the night? Because you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. Michael leaned back in the chair, eyes narrowed. If I'm making you nervous, it means I'm doing something right. Click, the line went dead. Michael stared at the phone. The threats didn't bother him, they confirmed everything. He stood up, stretched, and walked across the gym to a small metal filing cabinet. Inside, he kept a box of personal letters, fan mail. One envelope was torn and faded. Elijah's handwriting. Dear Mr. Jordan, I don't have anyone left. My mom's gone. My brother's in jail. I just need someone to tell me I'm not crazy. They're trying to kick us out, and I think they're doing something illegal. I know it's dumb to write you, but I don't know who else to ask. Michael read it again, then again. He hadn't responded when it first came, but now it felt like a calling. The next morning, Elijah walked into court with the same ripped backpack, but this time Michael walked beside him, calm and unshakable. People stared. One guard whispered, Is he representing that kid? Another replied, Guess the system pissed off the wrong legend. At the defense table, Weston Clay was already waiting, his expression tight. Morning, Your Honor, he said as the judge entered. The judge adjusted his glasses. Let's proceed. Mr. Jordan, you submitted new audio evidence overnight? Michael stood. Yes, Your Honor. A recording from a public zoning hearing. In it, one party working with the plaintiff explicitly refers to obtaining a juvenile signature in order to revert title. He played the clip. The voice echoed across the courtroom, cold, calculated. Michael paused it right after the key phrase. This isn't about fraud. It's about exploitation. Elijah Banks didn't just sign something shady, he was targeted. Gasps. The judge leaned forward. Who submitted this audio? Michael glanced at Elijah, then back at the bench. An anonymous source, verified via chain of custody logs. It matches a planning board meeting tied directly to the redevelopment firm pushing this lawsuit. Weston Clay rose in panic. Your Honor, I object to the use of unverifiable recordings. The judge held up a hand. Sit down, Mr. Clay. I want a full authentication by tomorrow. If what Mr. Jordan says is true, this isn't just a civil case anymore. Michael looked at Elijah, then at the courtroom full of people who once laughed. They weren't laughing now. Michael didn't sleep that night. Back at his apartment, he sat on the couch in the dark, only the city glow flickering across his face. His laptop balanced on one knee, and next to him lay a thin manila folder labeled Banks. The more he dug, the more everything stunk of a set-up-phony consultants, backdated memos, ghost signatures. Elijah had been framed to look like the fall guy for something much bigger. Michael wasn't just fighting for a kid anymore, he was peeling back a system so slick, so coordinated, it could gut a family and get a bonus for doing it. He clicked into an online court record system and began comparing cases. Same redevelopment group, different names. And every time, it was someone poor, someone young, someone without a chance. He scrolled through tax liens, zoning changes, title transfers, all connected, all fast, all quiet. He sent screenshots to an old friend at a small nonprofit law clinic he'd funded years ago in Chicago, writing, "Need eyes on these. Urgent." He didn't include his name. He didn't have to. The next morning, Michael arrived early at the courthouse. Elijah was already on the steps, pacing nervously in a frayed hoodie and jeans that dragged across the pavement. When he saw Michael, he froze. "You really came back," he said, voice low. "You think I'd leave you hanging?" Michael said. "Not a chance." They walked in together, side by side. The courtroom wasn't packed yet, but word had gotten out. Michael Jordan was back, not for sneakers or press, but for justice. Weston Clay was there already, flanked now by two new associates, their suits stiff and expressions unreadable. Michael gave them a single glance and walked past. When court opened, the judge didn't waste time. "Mr. Jordan, yesterday's evidence raised questions regarding the plaintiff's intent and methodology. Do you have further material to submit?" Michael stepped forward. "Yes, Your Honor. We've reviewed 3 more transactions linked to this same redevelopment firm. In each case, minors or elderly tenants were used as the legal trigger for property seizures. None had legal counsel. All were handed contracts with forged clauses. He handed over copies, each annotated in bold ink. The pattern is clear. The firm knowingly targeted vulnerable individuals. Elijah Banks is not unique. He's just the first one with someone in his corner. The judge reviewed the first packet slowly. "And this information is verified?" "Yes, sir. By a third-party housing justice nonprofit," Michael said. "They'll testify." Weston stood. "Your Honor, Mr. Jordan continues to operate outside the bounds of legal practice." "Sit down, Mr. Clay," the judge snapped. "Right now, the only person bringing verified evidence to my bench is the man you keep trying to discredit." Michael's voice was calm but heavy. "This isn't about me. It's about a kid you wanted erased by paperwork." The judge leaned back. "Mr. Banks," he said, looking toward Elijah, "do you understand what's being said on your behalf?" Elijah stood, awkward but resolute. "I do. And I didn't know half of this until he showed me. But I know I didn't do anything wrong. I just didn't know how to fight back." "Well," the judge said slowly, "it seems like you found someone who does." A recess was called, and as people filed out, Elijah turned to Michael. "Why are you really doing this?" Michael looked down at the kid's cracked sneakers, the frayed backpack, the weight of a life no one had helped him carry. "Because someone once helped me when I didn't think I mattered," he said. "This is how I pay that forward." Michael spent the recess alone, seated on a bench in the back hallway of the courthouse. Legs spread, elbows on his knees, head bowed in thought. He wasn't tired, he was calculating. The pattern was forming in his mind like a play unfolding mid-game. The pieces were all on the board now. The fake signatures, the shady contracts, the targeted demolitions, all tied to a redevelopment group with deep pockets and shallow ethics. The difference this time? They'd picked the wrong victim. He pulled out his phone and called his old friend Camila, a former paralegal turned housing advocate who now ran a tenant defense network out of Brooklyn. When she answered, he didn't waste time. "I've got a kid they tried to bury with paperwork. Need your team to confirm a pattern of abuse, especially cases involving minors. Give me names," she said. He read them off from memory fast, direct. Each one linked to the real estate firm responsible for Elijah's situation. Camila exhaled. "I've seen 2 of those come across our desk. Eviction fraud. One ended up homeless. The other in juvie for refusing to leave a condemned building. I need affidavits," Michael said. "And I need them by tonight." "You'll have them," she replied. He hung up and leaned back, watching the light from a vending machine flicker down the hall. The system had underestimated him. They thought he'd show up for a photo op, maybe post a tweet, then vanish. But they didn't know who he was, not really. Michael Jordan didn't show up to lose. Back in the courtroom, Elijah was pacing. His hands fidgeted, eyes darting to the clock, to the door, to the floor. He looked like a boy on the edge of a cliff. Michael returned just before court resumed, placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder. "Steady. Whatever happens next, you hold your ground. You've already made it further than they ever expected." Elijah nodded. It was the smallest gesture, but it meant everything. The judge entered and called the session to order. Michael rose first. "Your Honor, before we continue, I've submitted new affidavits from 2 unrelated tenants targeted by the same firm. Both testify to identical patterns, contract confusion, pressure tactics, forged timing. One was a 17-year-old who signed under threat of immediate arrest. He handed them to the bailiff. The judge took them without hesitation. Weston Clay tried to stand, but his words faltered before they reached his mouth. The room shifted, subtly but undeniably. Michael walked to the projection screen at the front of the courtroom. "I also have surveillance footage," he said. "This is from a traffic cam outside the redevelopment office. It shows their head of legal leaving the building 5 minutes after a digital signature was registered under Elijah's name. Same day, same hour." Elijah was in school, verified by attendance records. The video played, grainy but clear. A woman in heels, a folder under her arm, a timestamp blinking on the bottom corner. "You said the kid forged this?" Michael asked, his voice sharp. "Then how'd he do it from his economics class in the Bronx?" The courtroom was silent. Michael turned to Elijah and whispered just loud enough, "You see that? That's what the truth looks like." The judge looked up slowly. "We will reconvene tomorrow for formal response. Until then, this court is adjourned." The gavel struck. As people stood to leave, Michael stayed seated for a moment longer. He looked at Elijah not as a lawyer, not as a star, but as a man who knew exactly what it meant to be doubted and alone. The kid was still standing. And so was he. By the time the sun set over the city, Michael was already back at his apartment, pacing. His phone was buzzing non-stop texts from Camila, confirming the affidavits had been notarized and submitted. A voicemail from a local reporter asking for comment. Even a missed call from a former teammate who had seen the case blow up online. But none of that mattered right now. What mattered was making sure Elijah made it through the storm. Michael paused at the window, watching traffic blur across the avenue below. For decades, he had been a symbol of excellence, of success, of glory, but none of it felt as important as this. No endorsement deal, no trophy, no final shot. This wasn't about basketball. This was about fixing something broken, and it had to be done with precision. At midnight, he met Camila at a quiet diner in Harlem. She slid a thick envelope across the table. Inside were transcripts, emails, legal drafts, and 3 more affidavits from families who had been pushed out under similarly fraudulent circumstances. Michael flipped through them slowly, absorbing the details, memorizing the language. "They've been doing this for years," Camila said, voice low. targeting the people least likely to fight back. When they can't evict, they falsify breach notices. When that doesn't work, they escalate to fraud charges, always just enough to scare people into disappearing. Michael tapped a page. How many of these connect back to the firm running Elijah's case? All of them, she replied. And 2 even name Weston Clay as the author of the paperwork. Michael looked up. You're sure? Signed in time. Stamped. He exhaled slowly, his breath fogging the diner's chipped window. Then, tomorrow, we bring all of it. The next morning, Elijah sat outside the courtroom steps, hands buried in the sleeves of a borrowed coat. Michael joined him without a word and handed him a sandwich and a bottle of water. Elijah took them gratefully. I had a dream last night, he said quietly. That I walked in, and they just threw me in cuffs anyway, like it didn't matter what proof we had. Michael leaned back against the marble column behind them. You know how many times I was told I'd never make it out of Wilmington? That I'd never go pro? That I'd never win without a stacked team? Elijah looked over. A lot every damn week, Michael said. The trick isn't proving them wrong. It's refusing to let them stop you before you even get the chance. Elijah nodded, eyes forward. Then let's go prove them wrong anyway. Inside the courtroom, the crowd was noticeably larger. Word had gotten out. Reporters lined the back. Local advocates filled the benches. And Weston Clay walked in with a forced calm that didn't quite hide the worry on his face. As court resumed, Michael stood and handed the judge the new packet. Your Honor, we're submitting 6 additional affidavits, 2 transcripts, and a notarized letter identifying a specific employee within the redevelopment firm who confirmed the deliberate targeting of minors. The judge flipped through the packet, expression unreadable. Michael continued, We've also obtained school records and security footage confirming Mr. Banks was not at the location when the disputed signature was logged. And perhaps most importantly, we now have evidence that the firm's legal counsel, Mr. Musafort Clay, personally oversaw the coordination of eviction threats against underage tenants without legal representation. The room fell into silence. Weston shot to his feet, rattled. Your Honor, this is absurd. Sit down, the judge ordered. We'll review every piece of this, and if even half of it holds, this case isn't just dismissed. It's criminal. Michael didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just placed a hand on Elijah's shoulder and whispered, Told you don't ever let them make you feel small. Elijah nodded once, jaw clenched, finally understanding. This wasn't just survival anymore. It was justice, and they were coming for it. Later that evening, Michael sat in his apartment with the lights low and a dozen tabs open across his laptop. His fingers moved slowly across the trackpad. As he reviewed emails Camila had just forwarded, internal memos leaked from someone inside the redevelopment firm. The messages were damning. One described a plan to fast-track low-income clearance for lot conversion. Another bluntly stated, Get the kid to sign. Doesn't matter if he understands it. We need the timestamp. Michael closed his eyes and leaned back in the chair. He had seen greed before. He had seen corruption. But the calculated cruelty of what was unfolding now made his chest tighten. These weren't just bad people. They were professionals at being predators, and they didn't expect anyone to care enough to stop them. He forwarded the files to Camila and added a message. Confirm source. Redact if needed. We're submitting this tomorrow. Then he sat still for a moment, letting the silence wrap around him like armor. For most of his life, his name had opened doors. Now, he was kicking them down for someone else. Across the city, Elijah sat at his kitchen table in a cramped 2-bedroom he shared with his aunt and little cousin. The apartment was loud neighbors arguing through the walls, the hum of the ancient fridge, the steady drip of the leaky faucet. But inside his own head, everything was quiet. He stared at the folder Michael had given him earlier that day. It was full of notes, timelines, even handwritten instructions explaining what to say if he got nervous on the stand. It felt surreal, like a movie he'd wandered into by mistake. You trust him? His aunt asked gently, appearing in the doorway. Elijah nodded. More than I trust the people trying to put me away. She leaned down and kissed the top of his head. Then don't be afraid. Sometimes, God sends giants to walk beside the small ones. Elijah clutched the folder tighter. He wasn't just being defended. He was being believed in. The next morning, court reconvened with even more eyes watching. Reporters from local news outlets lined the hallway. A camera crew from a national outlet had taken interest overnight. Michael arrived early, wearing the same dark jacket, face expressionless but alert. He carried a flash drive in his right hand and a folder under his arm. As the judge entered and called the session to order, Michael stood. "Your Honor, I have submitted emails recovered from within the redevelopment firm. The messages confirm a premeditated effort to extract fraudulent signatures from vulnerable tenants, including minors." He placed the flash drive on the bailiff's tray. Included is metadata verification, time-stamped communications, and language that explicitly identifies Mr. Banks as a target of strategic removal. Weston Clay's face was pale. He didn't rise. He didn't object. He simply sat, eyes darting toward the exit, like a man finally realizing his exit door had vanished. The judge read through the printouts, his brow tightening. Then he looked up, slow and deliberate. "Mr. Jordan, pending further verification, this court acknowledges that substantial evidence now suggests deliberate fraud by the plaintiff's representation. We are suspending all further proceedings until a formal evidentiary hearing can be scheduled. In the meantime, all charges against Mr. Banks are paused. The defense may file a motion for dismissal effective immediately." A gasp broke through the courtroom. Elijah's mouth opened, but no words came out. Michael leaned in and whispered, "We're not done yet, but that's the sound of their foundation starting to crack." Elijah nodded slowly, his eyes wide with something he hadn't felt in months. For the first time, he wasn't waiting to be destroyed. He was standing at the beginning of something bigger. That night, Michael didn't go home. He rode the subway, hoodie up, headphones in, not listening to music but to recorded interviews Camila had helped arrange with other victims of the same scheme. One after another, different voices, same pain. A mother who lost her apartment after signing a renewal she didn't realize was a termination. A teenager whose family was relocated to a shelter after missing a court hearing they were never notified about. A senior veteran whose building was demolished before his appeal was processed. Michael's jaw tightened with each story. This wasn't just about Elijah anymore. It wasn't even just about the fraudulent contract. It was about a system fine-tuned to crush the poor in the most legally polite way possible, paperwork that killed with a smile. By the time he stepped off at 125, he'd already outlined tomorrow's motion in his mind. He headed straight to Camila's office, tucked above a community arts center. The smell of paint and old paper thick in the air. Camila was still there, coffee in hand, eyes bloodshot. "You're not sleeping either," she said, not as a question. "No time," Michael replied. "We're filing tomorrow. I want that motion to be so tight they can't even breathe through it." She nodded and slid over a draft she'd started. Michael read it in silence, then pulled out a pen and began rewriting key phrases, clarifying legal points, making the language hit harder. They worked in tandem for hours, no wasted words, no time for small talk. When they were done, Michael leaned back and exhaled. "This is it," he said. "We submit this, and we shift the entire weight of the court." Camila looked up. "You sure you're ready for the fallout?" "No," he said. "But I'm ready to win." The next morning, Elijah showed up to court in a clean shirt and shoes that didn't fit, but had no holes. His aunt had ironed his clothes that morning and hugged him so hard he almost cried. Michael was already at the courthouse when he arrived, standing on the steps, staring down at the reporters like he was facing a fourth quarter with 10 seconds left and the ball in his hands. "Ready?" he asked as Elijah approached. Elijah nodded. "Let's do it." Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere had changed again. No more whispers, no more laughter. Everyone now understood something serious was happening. And it wasn't about celebrity or headlines, it was about exposure. Michael approached the bench as the judge called the session to order. "Your Honor," he began, his voice calm, controlled. "We are submitting a formal motion to dismiss all charges against Elijah Banks based on new and overwhelming evidence of legal malpractice, contract tampering, and targeted fraud committed by the plaintiff and their legal representatives." He handed over the packet, now heavier than any basketball he'd ever carried. Within this document is the testimony of 6 victims, 3 internal emails admitting deliberate coercion, metadata verification of the altered contract, and a financial trail connecting bonus payouts to the number of units vacated prematurely. Weston Clay tried to speak, but the judge raised a hand. "Mr. Clay, you will remain silent until the court decides whether to open a criminal inquiry." The prosecutor sat down, visibly sweating. Michael continued, his voice never rising. "This wasn't one bad contract. It was a Mandela repeatable, predatory blueprint for displacing the voiceless. Elijah Banks wasn't just wrongfully accused. He was used." The judge flipped through the pages slowly, each turn of paper like a drumbeat. Then he closed the folder. "This court will review the motion and render a decision within 48 hours. Until then, Mr. Banks is free of all current charges." Elijah sat in stunned silence. Michael just patted his back and whispered, "We're not done, but we just took the ball back." As they walked out, the reporters swarmed them. Microphones, cameras, questions. But Michael raised his hand once, stopping them. "Let the court speak," he said. "Then we'll have our turn." And with that, they walked past the crowd together, an all-time legend and a poor kid from the Bronx, writing their own playbook. 2 days later, the ruling came down like thunder. The court dismissed all charges against Elijah Banks, citing clear evidence of misconduct, procedural abuse, and deliberate fraud by the plaintiff's legal team. But the decision didn't just end a case, it ignited something larger. Media outlets ran the story across headlines. Michael Jordan defends teen in court and wins. Basketball icon slams legal corruption. From courtside to courtroom. But none of it captured what really mattered. Elijah wasn't a headline. He was a kid who almost lost everything because the system bet on his silence. And Michael hadn't just defended him, he'd broken a cycle. That afternoon, Michael and Elijah met at a quiet bench in Van Cortlandt Park. No cameras, no press, just the two of them and the sound of distant traffic. Elijah sat hunched, backpack between his knees, staring at the grass. "I don't know what to do now," he said softly. "I thought they'd bury me, and now I'm just free?" Michael leaned back, arms crossed. "You're not free yet. You've still got to live in the same world. But now that world knows your name. That's power." Elijah looked at him. "What do I do with it?" Michael tilted his head. "Use it. Speak. Be louder than they want you to be. Tell your story until someone else hears it and realizes they're not crazy either." Elijah nodded slowly, the weight shifting in his chest. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was surviving. He felt like he was starting. Across the city, Camila had already begun assembling a case file to present to the Attorney General's office. The evidence they'd compiled was more than enough to trigger a formal investigation into the redevelopment firm's practices. Internal emails, recorded statements, bank transfers, victim testimoniate painted a picture too detailed to ignore. She called Michael that evening. "The state's interested," she said. "They want to meet next week. Might go federal." Michael listened, quiet, then finally said, "Good. Keep it moving. Don't stop. You coming with me?" "No," he said. "I'm stepping back." "Seriously?" "Elijah's free. We blew the lid off. But if this turns into something bigger, it needs to be about the victims, not the guy with sneakers." She hesitated. "They'll still talk about you." "Let them," Michael replied. "But make sure the work doesn't stop just because I'm not in the picture." That night, he sat at his kitchen table with the original manila folder labeled "Banks Now Closed," rubber banded, and placed beside a new one labeled "Housing Fraud Patterns, East Coast." He wasn't done. He was just widening the lens. In a neighborhood library the next day, Elijah gave his first public statement. No lawyers, no publicists, just a circle of folding chairs and a crowd of people who had seen their own stories in his. "I'm not special," he said. "I just got lucky." But nobody should have to get lucky to survive. When he finished, the room applauded not because he was eloquent, but because he was real. Michael stood in the back, cap pulled low, arms folded. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The kid was doing just fine. Later, as they crossed paths near the door, Elijah stopped him. "You said I was holding the ball now." Michael nodded. "Still true. Then what's next?" Michael smiled faintly. "You run the play." The following week brought a strange kind of quiet. Not silence, not peace, just a slow settling of dust after a storm. Elijah returned to school under the cautious gaze of students who weren't sure how to talk to him anymore. Some looked at him like he was famous, others like he was radioactive, but Elijah didn't care. He sat in the back of class, kept his head down, and took notes with the kind of focus only someone who had nearly lost everything could understand. At home, things felt different too. His aunt no longer hovered over him with worried eyes. His little cousin started asking him to help with homework again. For the first time in a long while, life felt like it had edges he could touch, control, even shape. Across the city, Michael stayed low. He declined interviews, ignored talk show invitations, and turned down 3 offers to sign a book deal about the trial. This wasn't about building a legacy. It was about restoring someone else's future. He spent his days in libraries, city records offices, and housing authority basements, digging into files that didn't want to be found. His nights were filled with meetings, Camila, pro bono lawyers, tenant activists laying the groundwork for something that didn't exist yet but needed to. A project, a network, something bigger than one courtroom win. But the opposition hadn't disappeared. That became clear when Camila called one night with tension in her voice. "The firm is lawyering up. Heavy hitters, big names. They're trying to discredit the affidavits, paint it all like a fluke." Michael was silent for a moment. "Then we get louder. They'll go after you. They already tried," he said. "Now they'll try to bury the rest. We don't let them." Meanwhile, Elijah began receiving messages, some supportive, others laced with veiled threats. Screenshots of tweets, anonymous DMs, even a printed envelope slid under the front door with a single typed line, "Watch your mouth." He showed it to his aunt, who pressed her hand to her mouth and called Michael immediately. Michael came that night. No press, no suit, just him and his presence, which was enough to settle the room. He looked Elijah in the eye and said, "Fear's just a tax you pay to do something important, but you don't pay it alone." The next day, they met with Camila and began drafting plans for what Michael called the full court press initiative, legal defense for housing cases, media counter-narratives, and education for teens about their tenant rights. Elijah would be its first youth ambassador. "Me?" he asked, blinking. "Why me?" "Because they picked you thinking you wouldn't matter," Michael said. "Now you do. That's the weapon." Together, they outlined the project-free legal clinics at local rec centers. No, your rights cards distributed at high schools. A website with clear breakdowns of how to read a lease, what to do if you're being harassed, how to document fraud. It was scrappy, bare bones, but it was real, and it was starting. That night, as Michael rode the train back to his apartment, he caught his reflection in the window, not the man in the commercials, not the icon, but just himself, older, sharper, and somehow more alive. He wasn't chasing greatness anymore. He was building it where nobody expected to find it. And for the first time in a long while, that felt like enough. 3 weeks passed, and the headlines slowly changed course. The media's fixation with the Jordan trial gave way to the more gripping, unfolding story of systemic housing corruption in New York City. Names began to surface: contract officers, project leads, even junior staffers who had signed documents without asking questions. The real estate firm behind Elijah's case was now under investigation, and the state had announced the formation of a special task force. But none of this came easily. Michael watched as reporters tried to reframe the narrative, centering him in every frame. They used his face to sell justice, his name to dress up decay. He hated it. He didn't need to be the hero. The kid did. The victims did. The truth did. He gave one interview to the New York Times, on his terms, in his words. "I didn't walk into court to prove anything," he said. "I walked in because someone was being crushed and didn't have a voice. I lent mine, that's all." After that, he refused further press. Let the work speak. Meanwhile, Elijah had begun speaking at community centers, schools, and tenant meetings. He stumbled at first, unsure how to hold a room, how to move past his nerves. But every time he spoke, someone in the crowd nodded. Someone clutched a folder tighter. Someone asked a question they'd never dared ask before. He wasn't polished, but he was real. And that was enough. One evening, after a talk in a Brooklyn basement rec hall, a boy no older than 10 tugged at Elijah's sleeve. "You went to court?" he asked. "Yeah," Elijah said, kneeling to his level. "Were you scared?" "Terrified." "Did you win?" Elijah smiled, soft and tired. "We're still winning." That night, Michael and Camila met at a diner on 104th, tucked into the back booth while Camila went over spreadsheets on her iPad. "The initiative's working," she said. "We've had over 400 people visit the site. 36 calls from people asking for help. 7 cases filed already." "And backlash?" Michael asked. "Building. There's money involved. Reputation. Someone's going to push back soon." "Good," he replied. "Means we're hitting where it hurts." A waitress brought coffee. Neither of them touched it. Michael stared out the window for a long moment. "You ever wonder how many more Elijahs are out there?" Camila looked up. "Every day." "Then we keep going," he said. "And when they hit back, we hit harder with facts. Names. Receipts." She smiled. "You ever think you'd be this deep in court battles?" "Never," Michael said. "But maybe this is the only court that still matters." Outside, the city moved on, fast and indifferent. But in rooms like these, in school gyms, underfunded rec halls, and dusty courthouse corners, something else was taking shape. Something louder than fear, stronger than silence. They weren't fighting for headlines anymore. They were fighting for permanence. And they had no plans of backing down. 2 months after the dismissal of Elijah's case, the Full Court Press initiative had evolved from a loose grassroots effort into a structured campaign. Michael funded the first real office space himself, just 3 rooms above a closed-down sneaker shop in Queens. No press release, no ribbon cutting. Just desks, folding chairs, a donated printer, and a whiteboard covered in case numbers. Camila brought in a small team of volunteer attorneys, paralegals, and social workers. Elijah came in every day after school, answering phones, logging intake forms, and slowly finding his voice as more than a survivor, a witness, a mentor, even a leader. The boy who had once been a case file was now helping others walk out of the same shadows. One rainy evening, Michael stood in the back office, staring at a bulletin board filled with pinned affidavits and court dates. Each pushpin represented someone who'd been tricked, displaced, or intimidated. Each case was a crack in the wall, but they needed a sledgehammer. Camila stepped in with a new file. "This one's different," she said. Tenant was never even notified of the hearing. Woke up to a lock change. Michael flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning fast. "Same firm? Subsidiary. Looks like they're trying to spread liability." He didn't look up. "Let's name the whole tree." They stayed until 2 a.m., mapping out the chain of shell companies, linking addresses and emails, digging until even the most sanitized paper trail started to show blood. Across town, Elijah was walking home when he noticed a dark sedan parked near his building. It wasn't unfamiliar, but it wasn't from the neighborhood either. Tinted windows, engine idling. He kept walking, posture straight, pace slow. When he reached the door to the building, he turned back and made eye contact with the front passenger window. It rolled down halfway. A man inside stared back, expression unreadable. Then the window rolled up again, and the car drove off. Elijah stood there for a long minute, heartbeat loud in his ears, then walked inside without looking back. He texted Michael one word, "Watched." The reply came quick, "I'll handle it." The next day, Michael installed security cameras outside Elijah's building. No fanfare, no warning, just the silent message, "We see you now." At the office, the mood was tense but focused. They'd begun receiving anonymous threats voicemails with long silences, envelopes with no return address. One letter simply read, "You made your point. Stop now." Michael pinned it to the board. "We don't stop," he said. "We double down." That afternoon, A woman came into the office, dragging a stroller and clutching a water-stained manila envelope. Her landlord had tried to evict her using paperwork that referenced the wrong address and a non-existent court hearing. Michael sat with her personally, walked her through each line, and called the housing authority himself. When they hung up, she looked at him with wide eyes. "Why would someone like you help someone like me?" He smiled, just barely. "Because they were counting on no one helping you." That night, Elijah stayed late, working beside Camila to update the intake logs. When he looked up, Michael was standing in the doorway with 2 takeout bags. They ate in silence, tired and worn. But there was a steadiness in the air now, like the weight was still there, but it was being shared. "You know," Elijah said between bites, "I used to think you were some perfect superhero or something, but you're just a guy." Michael raised an eyebrow. "Disappointed?" "No," Elijah said. "Relieved. Means I can do it too." Michael leaned back in his chair and smiled, something slow and real. Exactly. The storm hadn't passed, not even close. But the walls were shaking, and they were still building stronger, wider, and louder. By the time fall settled over the city, the full-court press initiative had grown into something the developers could no longer ignore. 3 lawsuits had been filed. 2 emergency injunctions had halted pending evictions. One judge had even cited Michael by name in a ruling, referring to his involvement as a stabilizing force of public accountability. But with momentum came resistance. The real estate lobby launched a counter-campaign, flooding media outlets with op-eds about celebrity interference and undue public pressure on the justice system. One cable host called Michael a man out of his depth, playing lawyer in a dangerous sandbox. Michael watched the clip once, then deleted it. He wasn't interested in arguments. He was interested in wins. Camila, however, was furious. She paced the office one evening, waving a copy of the article in her hand. "They're coming for your credibility," she said. "They're going to say you're some rich guy playing hero." Michael didn't even look up from the stack of documents he was reviewing. "Then let them say it, while we keep pulling people out of the fire. They're going to make it personal," she warned. "They already have," he said calmly, sliding a photo across the table. It was a still from one of their newly submitted cases. A 13-year-old boy, standing outside his family's boarded-up apartment, clutching a plastic bag filled with textbooks. "This is personal, and it always will be." Meanwhile, Elijah's confidence had grown. He was leading meetings now, answering calls, training new volunteers. His voice had steadied, his presence sharpened. But one afternoon, as he was locking up, he noticed something strange. The office door, which always stuck unless pulled hard, was slightly ajar. Inside, one of the file drawers was open, papers scattered, a hard drive missing. He called Michael immediately. Michael arrived in 20 minutes, eyes scanning the damage without a word. He pulled on gloves, checked the door for signs of forced entry. None. Whoever did this had a key. "We've been infiltrated," he said quietly. "Could be a warning, could be a copy job." Elijah was shaking slightly. "Did we lose anything?" "Backups exist," Michael said. "But if they stole something specific, they're looking to get ahead of a hit." They checked the access logs. Only 2 people had entered the office in the last 24 hours, Camila and Elijah. Michael scanned the footage from the hallway camera he'd insisted they install 3 weeks earlier, and there it was. A figure in a city maintenance jacket, hood up, slipping into the stairwell at 3:12 a.m. No face, no ID, just intent. They filed a report with the precinct, but both Michael and Camila knew nothing would come of it. The system wasn't built to protect people like them, not from the wealthy, not from corporate theft masquerading as legal maneuvering. That night, Michael made 2 calls. One to a cybersecurity expert he knew from a former business deal, the other to a retired federal investigator who owed him a favor. "I need eyes," he said. "Real ones. Quiet, off-grid." Within 48 hours, the office had new locks, a mirrored backup system, and a discreet alarm with silent ping alerts routed to Michael's phone. No press release, no drama, just reinforcement. They didn't panic, they adapted. Meanwhile, Elijah sat alone in the back room with the case files they'd saved. He read them one by one, names, dates, timelines. He highlighted. He wrote notes. He cross-referenced emails. For hours, he worked like someone possessed. Like someone who had once been powerless and now understood what it meant to fight. When Michael passed the room near midnight, he saw him through the glass, hunched over a table, eyes burning with purpose. He didn't interrupt. He just nodded once to himself and kept walking. They were under attack now, which meant they were getting close. And when the walls started to shake, it was because something on the other side was afraid. The break-in marked a turning point, not just in the rhythm of their work, but in the atmosphere surrounding it. There was a new weight to every decision, a sense that each step forward might trigger another shadowy hand reaching back. But instead of backing down, they moved faster. Camila instituted a full digital lockdown. All case files were moved to encrypted storage. Daily logs were backed up once to the cloud, once to a hard drive that Michael personally kept on him at all times. The office now buzzed with a low-level tension, not fear, but awareness. The kind of awareness soldiers carry when they know the enemy is close. Elijah changed too. He spoke less, listened more. His old nervous energy had been replaced with quiet intensity. He began catching inconsistencies in paperwork, spotting patterns, and calling out weaknesses in the firm's eviction tactics. One afternoon, while reviewing a case involving a deaf tenant who'd been removed without ever being notified, Elijah leaned forward and said, "They're targeting people who can't fight back because they think no one's watching." Michael, sitting beside him, nodded slowly. "Then we make sure someone is always watching." That weekend, they held a community forum at a church in the South Bronx. No cameras, no media invites. Just folding chairs, cheap coffee, and stories. Over 100 people came. Some spoke through translators. Others brought folders full of letters, court documents, rent receipts that told quiet stories of eviction, pressure, loss. Michael stood at the back for most of it, arms crossed, listening. When Elijah took the mic and introduced himself, the room hushed. "I'm not a lawyer," he said. "I'm not anyone important. But I know what it feels like to be alone in a courtroom full of people who think you don't matter. I know what it feels like to be told, just sign it, and then realize you signed away your future. And I know what it feels like when someone finally says, 'That wasn't your fault.'" The room exhaled with him. People leaned forward. A woman in the third row wept quietly. When he finished, Michael finally stepped forward, just long enough to say, "We're here now, and we're not going anywhere." After the forum, an older man approached them. He looked worn, with grease-stained hands and a limp. He introduced himself as Mr. Domingo, a retired mechanic. "I got something," he said, pulling out a folder wrapped in twine. Inside were copies of correspondence with a private contractor connected to the same redevelopment group, letters threatening to condemn his building, photos of staged damage, and at the bottom, a printout of an email chain mistakenly forwarded to Himone where a project lead joked about kicking the old guy out before he kicks the bucket. Michael and Camila looked at each other, speechless. "Can we use this?" Elijah asked. Mr. Domingo nodded. "Just don't let them do this to anyone else." Back at the office, they scanned and logged the documents, adding them to a growing wall they called the skeleton mappa sprawling chart of names, companies, tactics, and connections. And right in the center now was a red index card labeled Domingo Email. That night, Michael sat alone in his apartment, the TV off, the city quiet outside. He held a pen above a legal pad and wrote one line, "If we don't finish this, they'll keep going." He didn't sign it. He just folded the paper, slid it into a file, and placed it in his coat pocket. The weight of it sat there like a promise. They weren't just disrupting a scheme anymore. They were exposing an empire. And empires don't fall quietly. The next week opened with a subpoena. It arrived at the full court press office, hand-delivered in a crisp envelope addressed to Michael Jordan. The letter inside summoned him to testify in a preliminary hearing regarding allegations of undue public influence and obstruction of housing development operations. Camila read it twice before speaking. They're flipping the narrative, painting you as the disruptor, the man interfering with economic progress. Michael folded the paper, slid it back into the envelope, and set it on the table without a word. Elijah sat across from them, wide-eyed. They're going after you now? Of course, Michael said. They can't discredit the cases, so now they'll try to discredit the person shining the light. Camila sighed. It's not a criminal charge, just a show trial. They want headlines. Then let's give them some, Michael said. That afternoon, they held a small press conference on the sidewalk outside the office. No suits, no podium. Just Michael in a bomber jacket, Elijah beside him, Camila holding a folder in her arms. Reporters circled with microphones and cameras as Michael spoke. This subpoena is not a defense of the law. It's a defense of a racket that got caught. If they want to put me on the stand, I'll go. I'll go with names, with files, with timestamps. I'll go with every victim who sat in this office holding eviction papers they didn't understand. I'm not the one they should be afraid of. The truth is. The clip aired on local news within the hour. Online, it exploded. Let Jordan Speak trended for 2 days. Civil rights groups issued statements of support. Even retired judges wrote op-eds defending his work. But behind the noise, the pressure mounted. Camila received notice that one of their funding partners was re-evaluating its sponsorship. The building manager asked them to vacate within 60 days due to structural renovations. Anonymous emails flooded their inbox, some mocking, others threatening. One simply read, "You forgot who owns the ground you walk on." That night, Michael sat with Elijah on the rooftop of the building, a stack of files between them and the city lights blinking in the distance. "You ever think about quitting?" Elijah asked. Michael looked at him. "Only when I confuse comfort with peace." Elijah nodded, not fully understanding but feeling the weight of the answer. "What if they shut us down? Then we open somewhere else. And if they shut that down, we keep moving." "Why?" Elijah asked. "Why keep fighting when they just get dirtier?" Michael exhaled through his nose. "Because they're afraid. Afraid of poor kids learning how contracts work. Afraid of janitors knowing their rights. Afraid of families that don't run anymore. You scare them. That's why they're coming this hard." A long silence followed. Then Elijah said, "So we don't run?" "No," Michael said. "We stand." The next morning, Michael walked into the courthouse for the hearing. No lawyer beside him, just a binder tucked under his arm. The lobby cameras flashed. The court officers whispered. But he walked in steady, not to defend himself, but to show them that he wasn't alone. He carried the weight of every person they tried to erase. He wasn't a man out of his depth. He was exactly where he needed to be. The courtroom wasn't the usual kind, no criminal charges, no jury. Just polished wood, expensive suits, and a thin veneer of civility, masking what was, at its core, a desperate attempt to discredit a man who refused to stay quiet. Michael sat at the defense table, a simple black binder open in front of him. Across from him sat a row of legal representatives for the redevelopment firms, their expressions taut and rehearsed. At the head of the room, a hearing commissioner presided with a measured gaze that pretended neutrality, but couldn't quite hide the tension humming underneath. Camila sat behind Michael, silent but watchful. Elijah had wanted to come, but Michael had asked him not to. "This one's mine," he had said. When the proceedings began, the opposing counsel wasted no time in their framing. They painted Michael as a celebrity meddler, someone leveraging fame to rally public sentiment against lawful development. They presented media clips, tweets, headlines. "Mr. Jordan has turned this into a circus," one lawyer said. "He has manipulated attention to interfere with operations that are, on paper and in practice, fully legal." Michael didn't react. He waited, and when it was his turn to speak, he stood without theatrics, without bravado, and opened his binder. "I'm not here as a celebrity," he said. "I'm here as a witness to patterns, a witness to silence, and a witness to the cost of pretending that legality and justice are always the same thing." He passed forward copies of tenant affidavits, one by one. This woman was evicted while in hospice care. This family received court documents postmarked 2 weeks after their hearing date. This teenager, Elijah Banks, was accused based on a forged signature placed on a document while he was sitting in a classroom. He paused, letting the silence fill the room. None of these people had lawyers. None had money. But all of them had the same thing happen to them. And I didn't fabricate that. I found it. One of the firm's attorneys interrupted. With all due respect, Mr. Jordan, your efforts have made this an issue of emotion rather than law. Michael turned to him slowly. What you call emotion, I call humanity. What you call disruption, I call exposure. And if your business model only works in the dark, then it was never meant to stand in the light. The commissioner leaned forward. Mr. Jordan, do you deny interfering with legal proceedings or housing development? I do not deny that I've helped people understand what they sign. I do not deny that I've helped them file paperwork they were never told existed. And I certainly do not deny that I've used my name to bring attention to abuse that your system wasn't interested in addressing. There was no outburst, no gavel slam, just a tightening of posture in the opposing row, the realization that their strategy wasn't landing. When the session adjourned, reporters swarmed the hallway, but Michael kept walking. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The city already heard him. Back at the office, Elijah was waiting. You good? He asked. Michael nodded. They threw everything they had, he said. And we're still standing. Camila entered behind them, holding a thick envelope. Got something else, she said. An anonymous dropped more emails, this time naming names. One of the developers used a dummy company to issue falsified repair notices. It was a setup for forced displacement. Michael flipped through the pages. It's not just a firm, it's a playbook. And we're about to burn it, Camila said. Elijah stood a little taller, his hands clenched without realizing. They weren't waiting for permission anymore. They were writing their own rules now. And this wasn't about proving a point. It was about making sure no one could ever pull this off again. The next morning, the city woke up to something it couldn't ignore. A file dump hit 3 major newsrooms at once: the Times, the Post, and the local affiliate of a national broadcast network. Dozens of internal memos, contracts, and emails leaked from inside the redevelopment conglomerate. The documents detailed tactics for forced displacement, coordination between law firms and property managers, and bonus structures tied directly to eviction rates. The emails used code words like rotation and clearance when referring to entire buildings of working-class tenants. One file included a spreadsheet of targeted addresses flagged as convertible. Next to each, the projected legal cost of removal, the estimated market flip value, and a column labeled noise risk, where people like Elijah had been marked low. Within hours, the story went national. Anchors read lines aloud that sounded like crime fiction. Politicians began issuing statements. City council members called emergency sessions. And in the middle of it all, Michael Jordan held a quiet meeting in the back of the full-court press office with Camila, Elijah, and a few of their newest volunteer attorneys. He didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. This is our window, he said. They're scrambling now, but if we don't turn this into change, they'll survive it. They'll rebrand. They'll wait us out. Camila tapped the folder in front of her. Then we bring more. We go louder, faster. We get these victims into courtrooms, onto record, Elijah added. And we tell them how to fight every tenant, every neighborhood. Michael nodded. We make this personal. Systemic isn't faceless. It has names, companies, invoices. Let's show them. Over the next 48 hours, the office became a machine. The phone rang non-stop. Tenants who had stayed silent for years began coming forward. A janitor from East Harlem brought photographs of staged building damage. A retired teacher showed altered court papers signed by someone she'd never met. A single mother from Queens had footage of a building manager bribing a court processor to fake service of eviction. They cataloged everything. Camila created an intake system to track patterns. Elijah trained volunteers on how to digitize and encrypt evidence. Michael spent most of his time on the phone reaching out to law clinics, civil rights groups, and federal contacts who owed him favors not because of his name, but because they knew he didn't bluff. Meanwhile, the opposition launched a PR campaign to spin the narrative claims of isolated misconduct. rogue employees, old records taken out of context. But it was too late. The truth had broken surface. Protesters gathered outside developer offices holding signs that read, "Housing is not a game," and "Systemic doesn't mean invisible." Elijah stood among them, speaking through a megaphone for the first time. "They wanted us to believe this was normal," he said, voice raw and unshaken. "They wanted us to stay quiet. But the truth doesn't stay buried when people decide they've had enough." That night, back at the office, Michael sat in the dark, alone, staring at the city through the dusty window. He didn't feel triumphant. He felt ready. This was no longer about defending one case. It was about dismantling the illusion of fairness, brick by brick. The file dump had started the fire. Now they had to make sure it didn't go out. By the end of the week, subpoenas started landing in the inboxes of people who once believed themselves untouchable. Regional project managers, outside counsel, even a deputy commissioner from the city's housing board. The Attorney General's office had officially launched a multi-agency probe, citing the leaked documents as a basis for a far-reaching investigation into fraudulent eviction practices and systemic displacement schemes. But while politicians scrambled to protect their images and developers moved to bury their assets, the full-court press office remained calm, methodical, focused. Michael paced the main room with a legal pad in hand, scribbling connections between names and dates as Camila coordinated statements from victims willing to go public. Elijah, now fully comfortable behind a desk and in front of a crowd, helped prepare testimony for a single mother and her son whose building had been accidentally condemned. A few blocks away, reporters waited outside the firm's Manhattan office, cameras rolling as executives declined comment, and security ushered people past hastily taped-over logos. Inside the movement, the air was heavier not with fear, but with responsibility. They were winning, yes, but the deeper they dug, the more horrifying the scope became. Michael looked over a new stack of files dropped off by a whistleblower from inside a contracting company. Invoices for emergency maintenance that had never been done. Duplicate payments to law firms for copy-pasted eviction filings. Internal memos detailing tenant attrition strategies. "They wrote this stuff down," he muttered, eyes scanning a printed email thread between a property manager and legal team. "They actually documented how to manipulate court calendars to ensure families missed hearings." Camila looked up from her laptop. "They never thought anyone would look. That's how systemic power works. It doesn't hide, it dares you to notice." Michael pressed his finger to the paper. "Well, we're noticing. Loud." That afternoon, Elijah received an email invitation from a national talk show. They wanted to fly him out, interview him live, call him the kid who beat the machine. He stared at the screen for a long time, then forwarded it to Michael with a one-word message. "No." Michael walked into the back room later with 2 cups of tea and handed one to him. "You sure?" Elijah nodded. "I don't want this to be about me." Michael smiled. "Good, because it's not, but it also is." "What do you mean?" "You're proof," Michael said. "Proof that they failed to crush the kid they thought wouldn't matter. And whether or not you take the stage, they're still afraid of you." That night, they sat in the conference room with the entire team. Camila projected a spreadsheet showing the timeline of every confirmed fraudulent eviction they had connected so far. 67 names, 67 stories. Some from 10 years ago, some from last month. Michael pointed to the dates. "This isn't a scandal. It's a culture, one that treats people like debris to be swept out of the way for profit. We don't just want justice for these people, we want to destroy the system that made them disposable." No one spoke. They didn't have to. They were past speeches, past outrage. Now they were just grinding. In the quiet of the late evening, Elijah returned to the wall they'd built at the back of the office, a living map of files, faces, addresses. He pinned a new name to it, someone who had come forward that day, and stared at it for a long while. Then he reached into his backpack, pulled out his old eviction notice, and taped it beside the others. A moment of stillness, of permanence. This was no longer just about saving the future. It was about honoring the past and making damn sure no one ever forgot it. The next morning began with a call from a congresswoman's office. Her aide had been following the case, reviewing the leaked documents, watching the footage from Elijah's speeches. She wanted a private meeting with Michael, Camila, and Elijah. Not for the cameras, the aide said. She just wants to understand how deep this goes. They met that afternoon in a quiet room above a community center in Midtown. No reporters, no security, just 4 chairs, a stack of folders, and the truth. Michael laid it all out: how the pattern started, how they spread, how the same legal language had been replicated in dozens of court cases. Camila brought out a chart showing matching metadata across different properties, all linked to one umbrella firm through shell corporations. Elijah spoke last, his voice calm and practiced now. They picked people who didn't know how to fight. I didn't either. But they never thought I'd get help. They never thought anyone would care. They built this system to work as long as no one stood up. The congresswoman leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. You realize if we move forward with this federally, it's going to get ugly. It's already ugly, Michael said. We're just turning on the lights. The next day, her office announced plans to propose new federal oversight for housing courts, nationwide legislation that would require transparent case tracking, guaranteed legal counsel for low-income tenants, and penalties for firms found guilty of coordinated displacement schemes. It wasn't law yet, but it was momentum. Back at the office, the wall had grown. What started with one folder pinned to drywall was now an entire mural: names, photos, documents, dates, arrows, red string, receipts. Camila had begun calling it the People's Archive. They photographed every new edition. Michael funded a cloud backup system for it. A local arts collective offered to turn it into a traveling exhibit. Meanwhile, the backlash intensified. Anonymous calls. A smear blog post accusing Elijah of fabricating his eviction. A shadowy firm filed a suit against Full Court Press, claiming defamation, demanding they cease all operations pending litigation. Michael didn't flinch. He forwarded the paperwork to a partner at a national civil liberties firm who owed him a favor. The response was immediate. We'll represent pro bono. They won't scare you. We'll make sure of it. That night, Elijah couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his small bedroom, his cousin's soft breathing on the bunk below him. The shadows on the wall weren't frightening anymore. They were familiar. He got up, opened his notebook, and began writing notes, names, things he remembered from when it all started. Not for court, for himself, for the kid he used to be. Across town, Michael sat in his apartment, shoes off, tie loosened, staring at the window. On his table was a photo of his father, long since gone, wearing work boots and a grease-stained shirt. A man who'd once told him, "You can't outrun everything. Sometimes you stand still and let the world know you're not moving." Michael picked up the photo, looked his father in the eyes, and said softly, "I'm not moving." The next day, they returned to court not as defendants, not as desperate voices, but as the ones bringing evidence. Michael carried 3 boxes of documents. Camila brought a USB drive and a timeline chart taller than she was. Elijah brought himself, standing tall in a pressed shirt and worn sneakers. The judge looked at them as they entered, then at the counsel for the defense, a man already sweating before the hearing began. Michael placed the first document on the table. Let's begin. The hearing room was full, not with cameras or press, but with presence lawyers, auditors, court staff, and behind them, in every seat and lining the back wall, the people this case was truly about: tenants, workers, mothers, retirees. They came dressed not for spectacle but for history. Some clutched documents. Some carried nothing but the scars of what they'd survived. Michael stood at the front of the courtroom beside Camila and Elijah. No grand statements, no theatrics. Just a binder open to the first page, a timeline spread across the table, and the truth, heavy and undeniable. The judge reviewed the materials quietly, then asked for oral arguments. Camila spoke first, laying out the structural Rotho corporate fronts had used procedural loopholes to displace the poor under the guise of urban renewal. How the same 6 law firms had shared templates for court filings, recycling the same language to force settlements before tenants ever had a chance to respond. Then Michael stepped forward. "What you're looking at," he said, voice firm and steady, "isn't isolated. It's systemic. Built like a business model, complete with spreadsheets, incentive structures, internal memos on how to avoid media attention. And every one of these Cassevery folder, every photo represents a life they tried to push off the map." Elijah followed. He didn't speak long, just enough. "I was one of them. They thought I'd fold. They thought I didn't matter. But you're looking at me now because someone cared. Because someone said, 'That's enough,' and I'm standing here. Because I want to make sure nobody ever has to fight alone again." Silence followed, not the awkward kind, but the kind that signals something sacred has been acknowledged. The judge cleared his throat, folded his hands, and looked over the room. "This court finds cause for a federal inquiry. The patterns presented here meet the threshold for referral to the Department of Justice. All proceedings related to this matter will be formally reviewed for criminal violation, and immediate stays will be placed on all contested evictions listed in these files. We will proceed with public testimony and deposition scheduling effective next month." The gavel came down, but no one stood. There were no cheers, no outbursts. Just a room full of people breathing in something they hadn't felt in a long time, justice beginning to turn its wheels. Outside, the sun was setting. Elijah exited the courthouse beside Michael and Camila, flanked by dozens of others. He looked up at the sky, orange bleeding into gold, and for once it didn't feel like a backdrop to a fight. It felt like a beginning. Camila wiped a tear without letting anyone see. Michael stood still, looking out over the city, jaw set but eyes soft. "We cracked it," he said. "Not all the way, but enough." Elijah smiled, quiet but bright. "What do we do now?" Michael glanced over at the crowd behind them, people shaking hands, hugging, pressing copies of forms into each other's palms. "Now?" he said. "We build." That night, back at the office, they didn't work. They sat on the floor eating pizza out of greasy boxes, music playing softly from a laptop speaker, the wall of files glowing in the lamplight like a war room turned museum. One by one, new volunteers trickled in. A mother who testified brought coffee. A teacher offered to translate documents for Spanish-speaking tenants. A retired city clerk handed Michael a list of internal emails he'd quietly saved. No one left. No one wanted to. When the last box was closed and the last light flicked off, Michael lingered a moment longer. He looked around, not at what they'd built, but at who had built it. Not a brand, not a charity, a movement. And when he finally stepped outside into the night, he did so with the calm of a man who knew this wasn't the end. It was only the first win of many. Justice, he had learned, wasn't loud. It was patient, relentless. And now, thanks to a poor kid who once sent him a letter no one thought he'd read, it had a team.